the Cincinnati Bengals, playing in one of the most competitive divisions right now in the NFL, the AFC North. Very competitive race, and it's sort of been like a merry-go-round where everybody's been beating up on each other, but who knows who will come out on top in that division. But here to talk about the chances of the Bengals in the NFL playoffs and the AFC playoffs in general, here is my guest, longtime Bengals fan, Rich Wills. Rich, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
I am doing absolutely great. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the podcast. First of all, I wanted to start off and ask you, how did you become a Bengals fan, and what was that like? And I am assuming you go back to the Sam Weiss days as a Bengals fan, or maybe even before that.
Not quite that old. Unfortunately, when they were the last time they were good, but it wasn't really until the late '90s, early 2000s. Pains me to say it, but I was more of a Dallas Cowboys fan in the early '90s. My parents didn't really watch football, so I didn't really have any homegrown allegiances. But I went to Jeff Blake and kind of the Carl Pickens days during the Bruce Coslet era of the Bengals. Not necessarily what you would call good teams, but they were at least fun to watch. So that was 20 some odd years now.
What is your most memorable moment as a Bengals fan? I know sometimes memorable can be both good, bad, ugly, but to you, what stands out in your fandom as a Bengals fan?
Unfortunately, most of the last 20 years have been more pain than good. There's playoff games against the Steelers in 2015, but I'll go with the happy one. It was 2000, Corey Dillon versus the Broncos when we set the NFL rushing single game record at the time. That was really the first time I became a diehard Bengals fan. Just enjoyed watching him before then, but never really was a fan. But then kind of after Corey Dillon set the record, kind of got my attention, and I've been a fan ever since. So.
Expectations going into the season. I know Joe Burrow had that season-ending knee injury last year, and he was having a pretty good season despite the injury. And then, of course, Zach Taylor in his first full year as a head coach after Marvin Lewis's departure. What were you hoping the Bengals would be able to do going into this season, especially a year under each of those, both Taylor and Burrow's belts?
I think the expectation for me, most of it was, being able to be competitive in games. Wasn't quite sure what their record would ultimately be. From the few glimpses I had last year for the first, before Burrow got hurt, I think the offense could move the ball. Their offensive line wasn't necessarily the best, but they were still able to use the weapons. Higgins and Boyd outside, and Uzama before he got hurt, unfortunately. And then once Burrow got hurt, it kind of all went downhill. But so I think offensively, I figured they'd be at least able to move the ball fairly well to at least stay competitive in games. Run game was kind of a worry because once again, the line was so bad, Mixon wouldn't really be able to get a lot of room. But they were able to address that in the offseason. They added Riley Reef on the right tackle spot, and then kind of picked up a couple draft picks. Also adding Jamar Chase, help the offense and be more dynamic on the outside. So offensively, I figured they'd be at least able to, put up some points. Defensively was where I think the question mark really was. They were, I think, in the bottom half of the league last year in pass defense, and I think almost near dead last in rush defense. So they were just couldn't stop anything. But they added a lot of good pieces in the offseason. I think we got Trey Hendrickson from the Saints as a good D-line. He's been kind of underrated this year. He's had a sack, I think, in 7 straight games, and he's been playing great. Added a Larry Ogunjobi from the Browns, another D-lineman. And we added a couple corners. So it really helped kind of solidify the defense. Same for the most part, that was kind of largely unknown what they would be able to do, and it seems like they've been doing great so far this year, so it's been fun to watch.
Was there a point during the season that you were optimistic the Bengals were making the postseason? Was it that win against Baltimore? And it wasn't even just a win, it was a drubbing of Baltimore. Was that the particular moment where you were optimistic that playoff chances are big, especially now with a 17 field as opposed to a 16 playoff field?
Yeah, that I think made it really seem like it was definitely possible. Like we have the ability and the talent to compete with the good teams. Past teams would would kind of get to these big games and then just usually get beat kind of like how they beat the Ravens. So they would just get dominated, going back to the Marvin Lewis era lots of times. But the pessimistic, I guess, experienced Bengals fan in me knows that, can't hope. So I don't know that I'll ever fully hope until they're 100% in the playoffs. But definitely the Ravens game. They were a little banged up at the time, the Ravens, so it might not be the same team we see in 2 weeks. But hopefully get kind of the same outcome. But they were just able to come out after halftime, and I think they held the Ravens to 7 points in the second half and just really put it on them. So it was fun to watch, definitely unexpected. Same before then, I think they were just kind of a speed bump for Lamar Jackson. Not even, so they were just creaming us the last several years. And then this definitely gave some hope that we could definitely make the playoffs. Yeah.
Looking on the other side, was there a point where you were a little pessimistic? A particular game that just said, these guys are not ready for prime time?
After the Browns game, saying we kind of on a high after beating the Ravens like we did, and then lose a close one to the Jets, up 11 points with 5 minutes to go, and then blow that game late. So that was a tough one. That happens in the NFL. So hopefully bounce back in a tough division game against the Browns. They're still feeling good. And then they just got killed. And Nick Chubb ran all over them and just couldn't do anything right that game. And then their bye week came. So it was a good time for them. But then it, as a fan, it gave you some extra time to kind of sit, and you get 3 weeks to had some tough losses, and then you get to wait, and then they come out and have just a brutal second half schedule. Luckily, they've come out of it with 2 wins, but it was definitely a scary time. Past Bengals teams, I think they've been in the last 6, 7 seasons, they haven't won a game after their bye, and so everybody is just all pent up, ready to the season's about to collapse per usual, after the bye, but they've come out differently, thankfully.
Looking at the playoffs, the potential of the Bengals making the playoffs, who do you feel the Bengals match up the best with in the AFC playoffs?
Man, there's so many good teams. It's hard to think about. But I think Baltimore still, I know in the first game, we were able to contain Lamar Jackson pretty well. And if you can keep their running game kind of in check and prevent them from running all over you, it force them into passing situations. It gives you a chance against them. You're not always going to stop them, but it definitely gives you a chance. And I think the Browns showed last night with the 4 interceptions on them. It can be done. So if you can keep their running game in check, they can be beat. And then I think defensively, they're last against the pass right now. And I feel like our passing offense is really, really efficient. Great with Burrow and the receivers that we have, and Mixon out of the backfield, and Uzama at tight end. I think it's a really good matchup for us.
Who are you worried about seeing in the playoffs? Is it someone in particular? Is it New England who's starting to surge? Is it Kansas City? I mean, Baltimore? I mean, could it be anybody else? Could it be Tennessee? I know that's always a scary proposition when it comes to a lot of the teams in the AFC, but who, as a Bengals fan, scares you?
If Derrick Henry comes back from Tennessee, you have to be obviously scared of him, because that guy is just a truck out of the backfield. I think the Patriots right now, they've looked really good in the last 7, 8 weeks. I think they lost a close one to Dallas, and then other than that, they've just been crushing teams. And Bill Belichick has a habit of getting the most out of his players. Even they're doing it with a lot of guys that might not necessarily be, all pro guys, big name players, but they're getting the most out of it. Their defense is playing great. And Mac Jones, man, what a steal that guy was for him. I'm a big Buckeyes fan. I grew up here in Ohio, so I was hoping Justin Fields would fall there, because I figured that'd probably be the best spot for any of the rookie quarterbacks. And Mac Jones ended up there, and he's just he's been killing it. So they're going to be a tough team, and Belichick knows how to scheme better than everybody to be able to attack the team, and definitely scary.
Looking at the progress that the Bengals have made, if they make the playoffs and win a playoff game, would Bengals fans be content with that, especially knowing that how unfortunate they were in the Marvin Lewis era to not win a playoff game? Would they be content with that? Okay, that's it. That's fine. Or would they want more after that? What do you feel?
I think they'd be content to finally get the weight off their shoulders as far as those crushing defeats. Zach Taylor's been on the hot seat a little bit, but everybody's coming around on him this year now. It's a lot more of a positive energy coming from this team. So I think if we get one, it'd be good. Next year, probably a little higher expectations, but this year, I think 1 win is great. Yeah.
Going to the playoffs and looking at the prediction, who do you have for the Super Bowl coming out of the NFC? Who do you have coming out of the AFC? And who wins the Super Bowl, and what is the score?
Oh man, it's this has been an interesting year this year in the NFL. I'll say that much because a lot of the injuries, I think more than I've ever seen, and there's so many good teams, especially in the AFC. Everyone's in like the 7-5 or 7-4, 6-5 range. I think anybody could do it. I think I narrowed it down between Buffalo and New England. I think Buffalo, just because I think Josh Allen's a little more experienced. I think they come out of the AFC. I mean, any one of the top 5 or 6 teams though wouldn't surprise me. Out of the NFC, I think it's a 3-horse race there with Tampa Bay, Green Bay, and Arizona. And I guess until anybody proves otherwise, it's Tom Brady out of the NFC. As much as that pains me to say, because I think everybody can't wait for that guy to retire. But I'll take Buffalo over Tampa Bay, 35-28. Just I don't feel like that'd be a defensive battle because really 2 good offenses and those quarterbacks can put up some points. So a little higher score, but Buffalo pulling it out just to break their Super Bowl curse too.
Especially with the struggle Buffalo's had, it's hard to even figure them in the race because I feel like they had that collapse in AFC Championship game, and they just look like they didn't recover, even though they got out to a strong start. But they don't feel like they're the same team as they were last year, a team that could give Kansas City, in my opinion, a threat. But anything happens on a particular day, so you never know. So, Rich, before we start to wrap this up, I wanted to see if you had any shout-outs, anything you wanted to promote, and what are ways people can reach out to you to talk Bengals football?
I'm always happy to talk football with anybody, anytime, anywhere. I don't really have a social media or anything following, but my Facebook page. If anybody really wants to talk, I'd be more than happy. No other shout-outs. Just hope Hoo Day, go Bengals.